You know what they say, beauty is pain. But they forgot to mention, it's also pus, poison, and sometimes pee, from bat poop facials to lead-filled skin cream. History's obsession with looking hot has often been grotesque. You're about to take a slow, dreamy walk through the dim-lit alleyways of historical beauty, where the blush is blood, the lipstick is crushed bugs, and nothing smells like roses. So, grab your cucumber eye mask, unless it's made of cow intestines. Because oh, we're redefining that. Still awake? Good. You'll want to be. Hit that button like you're slapping on a cold leech facial. Because nothing says self-care like learning how gross beauty used to be. Let's start with a face. Not yours necessarily, though you're welcome to take a quick peek in the mirror and be grateful it doesn't reek of donkey fat and burned almond ash. We're talking about the ancient face, the heavily painted, sometimes rotting, often toxic, weirdly well-maintained centerpiece of early beauty culture. Because while history is often told in terms of wars and kings, you can learn a lot about a society from what it was willing to smear across its cheeks in the name of looking good. And for ancient civilizations, the face was a battlefield of vanity and questionable decision-making. Take ancient Egypt, for instance. The original glam squad of the ancient world. You might picture Cleopatra lounging around in gold accessories and eyeliner sharp enough to qualify as a weapon. But the truth was grittier. Literate, because Egyptian eye makeup was made from crushed malachite and green copper ore. You know, the stuff you'd normally call a toxic mineral. They ground it into powder and mixed it with animal fat to make a paste. Then slathered it on their eyelids like they were auditioning for a high-stakes death metal band. Why? Supposedly for protection from the sun and evil spirits. But let's not pretend the aesthetic wasn't a factor. There's vanity, and then there's I'm going to rub oxidized metals near my eyeballs for a shimmer. And then there's Cleopatra's milk baths, romanticized in everything from bad high school plays to luxury soap commercials. But in reality, it wasn't about feeling like royalty. It was early chemical exfoliation. Milk contains lactic acid, which breaks down dead skin. So yeah, Cleopatra was soaking in spoiled dairy to get rid of her ancient blackheads. A lactose-intolerant person's worst nightmare, and the ancient world's version of a chemical peel. But things get even juicier, or grosser, if we slide over to the Roman Empire. Those folks didn't mess around when it came to self-care. The rich and powerful had entire morning routines that could make a modern influencer cry with envy or horror. Moisturizers made from animal placenta, face masks made of snail slime. And yes, crocodile dung. Apparently nothing says youthful glow like the fermented feces of a semi-aquatic predator. And here's the kicker. They didn't just apply this stuff in private. Wealthy Roman women would host beauty salons in their homes, where attendants helped them prep for the day by layering on thick pastes, powders and perfumes. So imagine sitting around with your girlfriends, sipping wine and smearing each other with crocodile poop. That's either peak friendship or a bizarre cult. Possibly both. Meanwhile, burnt almond was a popular method for creating eyeliner. They'd literally scorch almonds, grind them into charcoal, and trace it along their lash lines with a delicate stick. It sounds chic until you realize there were no makeup wipes, and the sticks weren't always cleaned between uses. Pink eye was probably just considered part of the look. And don't even get me started on rouge. Both Egyptians and Greeks used a mixture of red ochre and animal fat to tint their cheeks, which gave them that dewy, just ran from a barbarian raid flush. Add a little lead powder to pale out the rest of the face, because health and color were seen as a little suspicious, and you had a look that said, I'm well off, possibly dying, but still fabulous. Of course, this all raises a very fair question. Did no one at any point think to ask, hey, maybe rubbing lead and feces into our skin isn't the vibe? But you have to remember, acne wasn't understood, aging wasn't accepted, and social currency came from appearing divine, untouched by time or toil. So, they experimented wildly, desperately, often with substances that today come with a skull and crossbones warning label. Which leads us to the bigger idea here. Why was the face such a focus for ancient beauty culture? Why did people risk blindness, infection or death to keep their complexion smooth? Maybe it's because the face is the first thing people see. It's your mask, your message, your mirror to the world. And when you're trying to survive an empire, get married at 14, or hold on to power in a room full of dagger-wielding rivals, looking flawless isn't just vanity. It's strategy. So yes, Cleopatra may have ruled with charisma and charm, but she also weaponized beauty like a seasoned general. That eyeliner, it was a power move. That milk bath, political skincare, when your throne is made of sand, figuratively or literally. Every beauty ritual becomes a kind of armor. And yet, despite all the dung and danger, these rituals weren't just grotesque, they were intimate, shared, ritualistic, passed down like secret recipes. It wasn't about looking beautiful for men, not always. Sometimes, it was about bonding, control, identity, survival. Let that sink in. Between the copper dust and donkey grease, there were women and men, just trying to feel seen, to glow a little in a world that didn't offer much light. So tonight, when you dab on your drugstore moisturizer and grumble about the cost, remember, it could be worse. It could be baguano in a linen wrap, applied by a blind servant named Marcus. Yeah, breathe that in. Dust and all, we've only just started peeling back the layers, pun absolutely intended. Because if you thought copper or eyeliner was a bold choice, wait until you see what they did with lead. If your skin hasn't flaked off yet from chapter 1, congratulations. You're ready for the Renaissance, that sparkling, intellectual rebirth of Europe, where art flourished, science stirred, and women smeared poison across their faces with the same enthusiasm as a toddler with finger paints. Welcome to the glamorous, grotesque era of lead-based beauty, a time when glowing meant slowly dying, and foundation was less about coverage and more about chemical warfare. Let's start with Venetian ceruse, the gold standard of 16th century high society complexion, made from a luxurious blend of vinegar and white lead. This paste promised the pale, powdery finish of a divine statue, and in fairness, it delivered right before it gave you facial tremors, tooth rot, bald spots, and neurological decay. But hey, you look stunning while slipping into paralysis. The logic behind the trend wasn't complicated. Pale skin meant you didn't labor in the fields. Translation: you were rich enough to be useless. Naturally, the rich clung to this aesthetic like their inheritance depended on it, because it kind of did. So women and men applied ceruse in thick layers, not once or twice, every day, for years. The goal wasn't just paleness, but luminescence, to look like you'd never seen a ray of sun, or a mirror with decent lighting. If you could pass for an ethereal ghost with slightly purple lips and sunken eyes, you were doing it right. Speaking of purple lips, that wasn't a goth choice. That was circulation. The common side effect of chronic lead exposure was cyanosis, which turned the lips and fingertips bluish. That in a stroke of morbid fashion synergy, this only enhanced the look. People began drawing blue veins onto their necks and chests with delicate goat hair brushes, as if to say, look how aristocratic I am. My blood is practically lavender. And the eyes? Oh, the eyes were not safe either. To really make those peepers pop, Renaissance beauty maidens turned to mercury-based eye drops, called belladonna, which dilated the pupils and gave the user a wide-eyed, dreamy stare. The kind of look that says, I'm both flattered and also possibly hallucinating. Belladonna, by the way, translates to beautiful woman, a name far more charming than its reality, toxic nightshade squeezed into your eyeballs. Now, if you're thinking surely they noticed something was wrong, you'd be half right. People did notice the symptoms. The fainting, the shaking, the hair falling out like wilted spinach, but instead of blaming the paint, they blamed bad humors or jealous spirits. Some even doubled down, believing more ceruse would balance the bile. And the elite? They couldn't afford to stop. Public beauty was private politics. Queens like Elizabeth I were notorious for piling on ceruse, in part to conceal the scars of smallpox, but also to assert control, dominance and eternal youth. Her iconic white mask wasn't just makeup, it was a statement. And beneath it, rotting skin, bruising sores, and allegedly a smell strong enough to wither tulips. But the illusion, flawless. Let's not forget the lips, where cinnabar, another heavy metal compound, provided that rich, romantic red, made from mercury sulfide. It was applied with brushes, sometimes fingers, sometimes awkward servants with trembling hands. Cinnabar was the same mineral used in ancient alchemy in paint pigments. In your mouth, where it belonged, because what's the point of a dazzling white face if your lips aren't screaming I licked the inside of a volcano? Of course some tried to cheat the system. Natural alternatives included crushed strawberries, mulberries, and red beetles. But if it didn't sting, blister, or smell like metal, it wasn't considered effective. Pain was part of the performance. So we have to ask, why did death-faced cheek become so entrenched? Partly it was fashion, but mostly it was survival. Social, political, and literal. For women especially, marriage was a career move, and your face was your resume. The paler and more pristine, the better your chances of landing a husband, staying married, or avoiding the convent. Which is why so many women, generation after generation, willingly painted their skin with death, because in the hierarchy of horror, a slow chemical breakdown was preferable to being poor, invisible, or unmarriageable. But there's a deeper irony here. These makeup rituals, these gilded, gruesome performances, weren't about vanity. Not really. They were about power, agency, control. In a world that offered women very little, beauty was one of the few currencies they could manipulate, even if that meant melting slowly like a candle under the pressure of social expectations. It's sobering when you think about it. The same hands that cradled babies, wrote letters, or held books, also spread lead paste over skin lesions, reapplying with shaking fingers. The same women who inspired art, poetry, and scandal, decaying silently behind a mask no one dared question. So yeah, take a moment. Let that sink in. Next time you complain about an expensive serum or an itchy concealer, imagine a woman in 5082 applying a third coat of ceruse over an abscess, praying it holds long enough to get her through a dinner party without bleeding through the powder. Still, it wasn't all despair. There were those who resisted quietly, subtly. Letters between women reveal moments of doubt, even sarcasm. One noble woman reportedly joked that her new complexion made her look like a moonlit corpse at a banquet, which is both horrifying and honestly kind of poetic. And while ceruse eventually fell out of favor, mostly because people started dying in mass, the legacy of skin perfection never left. Even now, we chase flawlessness with alarming urgency. Only now the toxins are labeled in French and sold in frosted glass bottles for $89 a pop. We may not be painting on lead anymore, but we're still trying to erase blemishes, hide imperfections, and present a face to the world that says, I have it all together, even if we're falling apart underneath. So yes, they died for beauty, but maybe they also lived for it, in their own toxic, luminous way. And with that, we leave the lead behind. Don't worry, it's not the last heavy metal in this story. Let's talk lipstick, that little tube of confidence, shame, and false promises. The modern version might come with a mirror and a brand deal, but the original, oh, it came with wings, tiny legs, sometimes antennae, enter, cochineal, a glamorous little beetle whose entire existence was crushed, literally, so people could color their lips and cheeks a deep, seductive red. It's romantic, really. Death by beauty. The cochineal insect hails from the prickly pear cactus, which already sounds like a location in a fairy tale or a breakup ballad, and was first harvested in ancient Mesoamerica. Indigenous peoples like the Aztecs have been using this vibrant crimson dye for centuries. Clothing, rituals, murals. And yes, makeup, because if you're going to make an offering to the gods, you might as well look radiant while doing it. But when the Spanish rolled into town and realized people were painting entire temples with what looked like liquid rubies, they did what colonizers always do. Stole it, branded it, and slapped a price tag on it. Suddenly, crushed bug became luxury export. And European nobles, they couldn't get enough. Carmine, as it came to be called, was everywhere. Lip stains, cheek rouge, eyeshadow, even paintings. Yes, Rembrandt's famous reds, dead bugs, high art, low life. In Victorian England, a time when public modesty coexisted with private hysteria, carmine was the secret ingredient behind that just barely blushing look. Women would bite their lips to make them redder, then dab on a bit of insect powder to keep the effect. Meanwhile, beetles were being raised in massive quantities, scraped off cacti, boiled, dried, and crushed. Also, someone in a corset could powder to parlor mirror. And here's the kicker. The process required 70,000 bugs to make 1 pound of dye. Let that crawl across your skin for a moment. 70,000 bugs to make 1 pound of pigment. That's not a color, that's a massacre. And yet, no one questioned it, because red was power. Red was fertility, passion, rebellion. Red said, I know I'm dying inside, but at least I'm doing it fashionably. Still, not everyone was on board with the whole Beatles slurry on your face thing. Enter Elizabeth in England, where colour was complicated, and personal hygiene was, let's say, optional. The elite bear had a very specific look, pale, sickly, and glowing like they'd just escaped a crypt. But there were always outliers, the adventurous types who dabbled in saffron skin tint, a yellow-orange hue that gave the wearer a sun-kissed glow with the scent of leftover curry. It was bold, it was unfortunate, and it made your face smell like soup. Saffron was expensive, ridiculously so, and rubbing it on your face was a way of flexing your wealth, but it also had the unintended effect of making you look slightly jaundiced. That didn't stop the trend. If anything, it enhanced it, because nothing says high society like looking vaguely diseased and very flammable. Of course, for the average woman, one without a castle, a chambermaid, or a Beatle budget, the options were less extravagant. They'd use crushed strawberries, mulberries, or sometimes red wine sediment. It worked well enough, until it rained, or until your suitor realized your kiss tasted like compost. Which brings us to a larger, more unsettling truth. The line between natural and horrifying has always been disturbingly thin. Think about it. One culture sees bugs as filth, another sees them as pigment, one sees saffron as food, the other as contour. Beauty trends weren't universal, they were local dialects in a global language of insecurity, and nowhere was this more evident than in the contrast between rich and poor. The wealthy had carmine and saffron, the poor, brick dust. Yep, crushed up clay, mixed with a little water or spit, smeared directly onto the cheeks, because nothing says girl next door like a face full of masonry. Now, let's not pretend the men were immune. While the bug lip craze was mostly a women's game, European men dabbled, especially in France, where Versailles became the epicenter of powdered wigs and painted faces. Men wore rouge, eyeline, sometimes even little red hearts pasted onto their cheeks. The original flirty emoji, but with glue. And you know what? It kind of worked. People in power looked ethereal, untouchable. They floated through rooms on a cloud of perfume, bug dust, and overcompensation. But beneath all that elegance there was something deeply human, a need to be noticed, to belong, to be beautiful, or at least beautiful enough to not be dismissed. And what's more human than crushing something smaller than you to make yourself feel worthy? It's easy to laugh now. We have Sephora, TikTok tutorials, non-toxic labels. We don't boil beetles. We don't bite our lips until they bleed. Unless it's a particularly rough Monday. But the instinct is still there, to smear something ancient and strange across our faces, and hope it makes us more lovable, more powerful, more alive. So next time you uncap that trendy crimson lipstick with the vaguely French name and the price of a small appliance, pause. Flip it over. Scan the label. You might see the word carmine. Yep. Still bugs. Still beautiful. Still just as absurd as it's always been. Hair. The eternal enemy. Across history, body hair has been treated with roughly the same enthusiasm as smallpox, something to be eradicated, feared, and discussed in hushed tones behind fans. But while modern marketing sells hairlessness with words like smooth, feminine and fresh, ancient civilizations achieved it with a slightly different pitch, pain, fire, and medieval gardening tools. Let's start in ancient Egypt, a land obsessed with hygiene, symmetry and body control. Egyptian women weren't content with a basic shave. No, they wanted complete smoothness. Head to toe, every inch. And how did they get there? By ripping it all out with a thick paste made of sugar, water and lemon, what we now call sugaring, and what they might have called agony with citrus. This early waxing method was applied warm, then yanked off with cloth strips or just bare hands. No aloe vera, no soothing music, just the sound of your skin screaming in hieroglyphics. Over in Greece, body hair was seen as barbaric. The only thing worse than having armpit hair was being Persian, apparently, so Greek women plucked with seashell tweezers, burned stray hairs off with oil-soaked string, and sanded down rough patches with pumice stones. Yes, the same stuff you use to scrape your feet in the shower. Now imagine using it everywhere. Let that sink in. Take a moment. Breathe that in. Dust and all. The Romans, always eager to one-up their Mediterranean neighbors, turned hair removal into a communal activity. Wealthy Roman women would visit the tunstrina, or beauty parlor, where slaves removed hair using a sharp bronze tool called a volsellum, essentially a glorified tweezer made for battlefield extractions. For those who wanted the express version, a strigil, curved metal, used to scrape oil, sweat, and yes, hair, off the skin. Pair it with a little sand and olive oil, and boom, you're exfoliated, moisturized, and emotionally scarred. And let's not forget the Romans' favorite tactic, pitch and resin, a sticky goo applied to the skin and yanked off in strips. Not unlike today's waxing, but with the added bonus of second-degree burns and the lingering scent of a dying pine tree. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, where we enter the golden age of eyebrow hostility. For reasons that remain unclear, possibly demonic possession, possibly just trend-setting, European noble women decided that foreheads were the new cheekbones. The higher and bolder your brow, the more refined you appeared. And so began the eyebrow purge. Women plucked, shaved and even singed their eyebrows clean off. Some went further, removing the front inch of their hairlines to elongate the forehead. Queen Elizabeth I was especially fond of this look, transforming her head into a vast tundra of alabaster nothingness. Rumor has it she used vinegar and walnut oil to thin the roots, then touched up the baldness with a red-dyed paste to match her wig. It was chic. It was terrifying. It was basically the medieval version of contouring. By the time we hit the Renaissance, things only got weirder. Hairlines were still high, but now there was an added obsession with smooth shoulders and arms. Enter quicklime, a chemical compound that burned through hair like acid, which is exactly what it was. Women would smear it on their limbs, wait until they felt the burn, the literal burn, then rinse it off with rose water, as if perfumed scouring somehow made it classy. If the burning didn't appeal, there was always threading. Not the modern spa technique with practiced hands and calming music, but the ancient DIY version, raw horsehair, twisted around fingers, and yanked across the skin like a saw. Smooth, occasionally, bloody, definitely, dignified, not even close. Now let's pause and talk about the royal mascot of historical hair weirdness, Queen Elizabeth I. This woman didn't just remove hair, she rewrote the rules. Her obsession with a smooth, ghostly appearance led to full-body plucking, elaborate wigs, and face paint thick enough to patch a ship's hull. The result? A fashion icon, a political powerhouse, and someone who probably hadn't felt a breeze on her scalp since childhood. Meanwhile, ordinary women followed suit with homemade recipes. One 16th century manual recommended a blend of cat dung and vinegar as a hair removal mask. Just imagine explaining that to your neighbors. Oh, that smell? Just grew me. But perhaps the most intense and underappreciated method belonged to ancient Iranian and Turkish women, who used a mixture called ridaz, made from arsenic and quicklime. It dissolved the hair, and sometimes the skin. Beauty, they believed, required sacrifice. Preferably not your entire dermis. But you never knew. Even more alarming, hair removal wasn't just cosmetic, it was often expected before marriage, childbirth, or religious events. Smoothness equaled purity, and if that meant a little bloodshed, so be it. Let's also acknowledge that men weren't completely off the hook. Ancient Roman men waxed their chests and underarms. Medieval monks shaved the crowns of their heads in the name of holiness, a practice that doubled as accidental scalp exfoliation. And in 18th century France, noblemen powdered their legs and shaved their arms, because why should women have all the fun? So what do we take away from this parade of burns, baldness and blisters? That hair, or rather, the removal of it, has always been tied to power, to gender, to identity. It was never just about looks. It was about conformity, cleanliness, control. Smooth skin meant discipline. Hair was primal, uncivilized, something to be eliminated, until your body resembled a marble statue, cold, clean, and conveniently mute. And maybe that's what makes this history so painful. Not just the quicklime and pincers, but the idea that people for thousands of years have been told their natural bodies were mistakes in need of correction. So the next time you groan about shaving your legs or curse at a rogue eyebrow hair, remember, at least you're not applying boiled tree sap with a prayer and a horsehair whip. And if you are, hey, you're part of a long traumatic tradition. Let's talk about your mouth. Not yours specifically, I'm sure yours is lovely, minty even. But historically, the human mouth has been a disaster zone. And if you ever thought morning breath was a modern curse, just wait until we uncap the historical bottle of dental horror that somehow passed as beauty. Let's begin in medieval Japan, where the standard of oral perfection was, wait for it, black teeth. Yes. Jet black. Oily, glossy, blackered to oblivion. This practice, known as ohaguro, was common among aristocratic women and geishas, who painstakingly stained their teeth using a mixture of iron filings and vinegar. The result was a mouth that looked like it belonged to a sentient inkwell. And yet, it was considered elegant, refined, mysterious, like a smile straight out of a shadow puppet show. Why? Well, for starters, black teeth didn't show food stains, they didn't yellow with age. They didn't scream poor peasant with a bread-crust addiction. And in a culture where modesty and mystery were prized, hiding your teeth in shadowy enamel was kind of seduct, like wearing designer darkness in your mouth. And ohaguro wasn't just aesthetic. The iron vinegar blend actually helped preserve teeth, preventing decay. So ironically, blackened teeth were healthier than white ones. Let that irony rot in your brain a little. Across the sea, Renaissance Europe was busy doing the exact opposite, because of course they were. White teeth were the rage. Pearly, perfect, radiant. But how did one achieve this snowflake smile before the invention of toothpaste, floss, or the concept of dental ethics? Simple. Specifically, Portuguese urine. It was imported by the barrel to Italy, where it was swished, gargled, and even mixed into tooth powders. Why Portugal? No one really knows. Maybe they thought Iberian urine had better whitening properties. Maybe it was just trending, like kale, but horrible. Urine contains ammonia, which actually does clean teeth. So yes, they were gross, but not entirely wrong. Still, it raises important questions about who first made that discovery, and how desperate they had to be. If you didn't have a Portuguese pea dealer on speed dial, you could always go the DIY route. Crushed oyster shells, burnt bread, or brick dust, mixed with honey or rosewater if you were fancy. If you weren't, just rub it on raw. For breath, herbs were everything. People chewed parsley, mint, cloves, not for taste, but to mask the stench of dental decay, infected gums, and whatever roast boar was still clinging to their molars from last Tuesday. The noble classes even carried pomanders, small, perforated balls filled with scented herbs, and would hold them discreetly near their noses when conversing with others. Basically the historical version of smell this instead. Still not fresh enough. Try a toothpick duel. In high society, men often engaged in subtle battles of oral hygiene. Fancy toothpicks made of silver, ivory, or even gold were displayed at court like weapons. You weren't truly refined, unless you could extract a chicken bone from your molar, with grace, poise, and a tool worth more than most farms. And speaking of tools, some people took things a bit further. Take the case of one particularly eccentric 17th century French duchess, who insisted on using a wolf's jawbone as her toothbrush. Superstitious belief held that the wolf's spirit would protect her teeth, or at least terrify any cavities into leaving. Brushing, in this case, involved scraping, muttering prayers, and possibly snarling. The results? Questionable. The vibe? Immaculate. Now, let's pull back for a moment, because, as absurd as all this sounds, and it is absurd, there's a deeper logic at play. In most of history, the state of your mouth said everything about your status. Clean, white teeth meant you had time to care, time to indulge. Blackened teeth in Japan said you belonged to a refined class. Gold-plated teeth in parts of ancient Mesoamerica weren't dental bling, they were social armor. Meanwhile, rotting stumps, that was poverty, disease, or worse, age, and nobody wanted to look old. Even if it meant brushing with bones or marinating in ammonia, there's a certain poetry in that desperation. A tragic beauty in the idea that people for thousands of years have stared into mirrors, mouths open, wondering if what they saw was good enough. Sometimes they chose black, sometimes white, sometimes blood red if the bleeding gums got out of hand. And through it all, the pursuit was the same: to be presentable, kissable, respected, or, at the very least, tolerable at court. Of course, the standards weren't always realistic. In fact, they often bordered on sadistic. Imagine being a poor maidservant in 18th century France, ordered to smile at a noblewoman, only to be reprimanded for showing peasant teeth. Or a geisha in training, staining her teeth nightly with iron lacquer, while quietly wondering if she'd ever be allowed to laugh without consequence. Because beauty, even oral beauty, was rarely just about choice. It was expectation. It was code. And if you couldn't meet the code, you didn't get invited to the conversation. So tonight, as you brush your teeth with a soft bristled tool engineered by scientists, think of the ones who came before you, swishing vinegar, scrubbing with bone, praying their smile would buy them another day of grace. And maybe flaw, just in case a 17th century noble ghost is watching, let's talk about bathing, or more accurately, the stunning historical lack of it. We modern folks live in a world obsessed with lather, rinse, repeat. But for most of human history, the concept of washing regularly was considered somewhere between suspicious and medically inadvisable, because back then, cleanliness was not next to godliness. It was, in fact, next to disease. See, the belief was that water opened up the pores, allowing in bad air, evil spirits, or worst of all, unfiltered peasant energy. If you exposed your skin too often to water, you'd basically become a sponge for plague. So naturally people responded with the only logical solution. They powdered everything. Let's begin in medieval Europe, where your average noble bathed maybe once a month. Maybe. If the moon was right and the servants were busy, instead of cleaning themselves they layered perfume, herbs, and oils over increasingly desperate layers of grime. Imagine trying to mask the smell of rotting teeth and infected fabric with a handful of lavender and hope. Royalty, of course, took this to Olympic levels. Louis XIV of France, the original fragrance influencer, reportedly bathed twice in his life, once when he was born, and once for diplomatic reasons. The rest of the time he trusted in scented gloves, aromatic sachets, and the divine right of kings to smell like a foot wrapped in cheese. Meanwhile his courtiers powdered themselves into oblivion. Wigs were doused in starch and perfume, then stored in boxes lined with dried flowers, and ideally pesticide. Why? Because the powdered wigs were a 5-star hotel for lice colonies. That's not an exaggeration. Servants were tasked with carefully combing through wigs to remove fleas and eggs, a job that paid less than nothing and often came with typhus. But don't worry, the wigs themselves were often made from horsehair. Or, in the case of the truly decadent, the shaved heads of children. Yes, children. A charming little detail they left out of your AP European history class. Across the continent, other bathing philosophies emerged, none of them especially comforting. In 18th century England, for instance, some believed that hot water weakened the body's vital forces, so instead of full baths, people did what was called a dry wash, rubbing themselves with linen cloth, then dabbing perfume on the pulse points like they were marinating a roast. But if you were really fancy, you had a bathing shirt. That's right, you bathed in clothes to protect your modesty from your own skin. God forbid your kneecap caught a glimpse of your elbow. Scandalous. Meanwhile, over in ancient China, they had a different approach. Bathing was more accepted, even revered, but still not an everyday thing. Instead, the go-to solution for hair, dry shampoo made from rice starch, ground herbs or clay. It was massaged into the scalp and brushed out, leaving behind a vaguely floral dust storm and a deeply confused sense of freshness. And in Rome, oh sweet Rome, bathing was both a social event and a microbial experiment. Communal baths were the place to see and be seen. You'd strip down, step into a hot room with 50 other sweaty strangers, and let the sweat of the empire coat you like a second toga. It wasn't about hygiene. It was politics, networking, maybe a little gossip, and definitely athlete's foot. The bathhouses themselves were architectural marvels, heated floors, marble statues, steam vents, but the cleaning tools, a metal scraper called a strigil, which looked like it was designed by someone who hated skin. You'd slather yourself in oil, scrape it off along with dirt and dead cells, and then toss the goop aside for some unlucky slave to collect, presumably to be used again, because sustainability. Now let's not pretend only the West was questionable. In parts of early modern Russia, steam baths or banyas were common, but the process involved being beaten with birch branches to stimulate the skin and promote circulation. You left the bath clean, sure, but also red, raw, and slightly traumatized. Still better than lice. In Islamic cultures, Bathing had deep religious and cultural importance. Hammams, public bathhouses, were cleaner, quieter, and more regulated than their Roman cousins. You'd wash before prayers, scrub with a mitt, and soak in calm pools under domed ceilings. Finally, a culture that didn't treat hygiene like a fever dream. But even the best intentions got weird. In Victorian England, the fear of water returned with a vengeance. Doctors warned that hot baths could lead to hysteria, fainting, or spontaneous pregnancy. Not kidding. Women were advised to sponge themselves with vinegar and cold tea, avoiding their delicate areas altogether. Men weren't off the hook either. Too much bathing could lead to moral decay. Whatever that meant. Which brings us to the royal bathing record holder, Queen Isabella of Spain, who allegedly bragged about only bathing twice in her life, once when she was born, and once before her wedding. Historians debate the truth of this, but honestly, it feels accurate. That dress didn't stand up on its own. After all, so what does all this say about us? About cleanliness, beauty, and the line between ritual and madness. It says that bathing, like everything else, was about more than hygiene. It was status. It was spirituality. It was fear. Sometimes, it was all three. To be clean meant you were risking exposure. To be dirty meant you were protected. To powder yourself until your pores cried for mercy was seen as elegance. To soak in scented oil was indulgent. Unless you were poor, in which case, it was sinful. So tonight, when you step into your hot shower, think of Louis XIV avoiding his reflection. Think of powdered wigs, teeming with microscopic roommates. Think of the servants scraping Roman sweat from marble floors and wondering if the gods cared. And maybe, just maybe, use conditioner. You're already doing better than most of history. If there's one thing history loves, it's a slow death that comes in a cute container. Welcome to the Victorian era, where vanity met chemistry in a doomed love affair, and arsenic became the ingredient of choice for glowing skin and slightly faster funerals. Let's be clear. Arsenic was not some back-alley beauty hack. It was mainstream. Chic. Marketed. You could walk into a 19th century apothecary and buy arsenic wafers wrapped in pretty paper, advertised with slogans like, "For a pale and perfect complexion," because nothing says radiance like a little light internal poisoning. These wafers promised porcelain skin, smaller pores, and freedom from blemishes. And sure, they delivered. In the same way, cyanide delivers a good night's sleep. Users reported clearer skin. They also experienced dizziness, numbness, organ failure, and eventually death. But at least they were beautiful corpses. And the packaging? Lovely, delicate fonts. Satin boxes. It all screamed refined self-care. Not you are consuming rat poison in mint-flavored lozenges. The logic, if you can call it that, went something like this. Arsenic constricted the blood vessels, reducing redness and giving the skin that fashionable, "I'm halfway to a fainting couch" pallor. It also killed bacteria, the kind living in acne, or the kind keeping you alive. Trivial detail. But arsenic wasn't just a snack. Oh no, it made its way into tonics, creams and soaps. There were arsenic-based shampoos, arsenic-laced face masks, and even water enhancers you could add to your tea, turning your morning routine into a Russian roulette ritual. And it didn't stop with arsenic. Victorian beauty was an entire apothecary of chemical horrors. Chalk water was another favorite. You'd mix powdered chalk into your drinking water to help clarify the skin. In reality, it just bloated your stomach, clogged your digestion, and gave you the haunted, hollow look of someone trapped in an Edgar Allan Poe story. Then came turpentine. Yes, stuff you use to clean paintbrushes. Victorian women would ingest tiny drops to make their breath smell like violets, not mint, not fruit. Violets. Because apparently, people wanted to exhale like a haunted garden. Turpentine was highly toxic. It caused internal bleeding, kidney failure, and a variety of hallucinations. But again, that floral aroma. Unbeatable. Of course, no historical beauty horror show would be complete without tapeworm pills. This little innovation emerged in the late 19th century and was marketed toward women who wanted to lose weight without giving up cake. The idea was simple. Swallow a pill containing a tapeworm egg, let it hatch, and allow the worm to do the calorie counting for you. Side effects included malnutrition, nausea, vomiting, and occasionally watching a living parasite crawl out of your body. But at least you could fit into that course. And if that's not commitment to the aesthetic, I don't know what is. Let's pause for a moment. Because behind all this horror, the wafers, the worms, the turpentine teas, there's a quiet, desperate question echoing through time. What am I worth if I'm not beautiful? Victorian women were sold a fantasy that perfection could be purchased, bottled, swallowed. That pain meant progress. That sickness meant sophistication. A woman collapsing at a dinner party wasn't weak. She was fashionable. A girl with chalky skin and purple lips wasn't dying. She was ethereal. But underneath it all, fear. Fear of aging. Fear of rejection. Fear of becoming invisible in a society that valued women for their looks, then punished them for trying too hard. Arsenic was not just a chemical. It was compliance, in powdered form. And the beauty industry, yes, it existed even then, knew exactly how to sell it. They used delicate language, euphemisms. They didn't say poison. They said complexion enhancer, refining agent, essence of youth. Just like today's brands don't say Photoshop. They say filter-inspired finish. History doesn't repeat itself. It just rebrands. And the men? Well, they weren't lining up for arsenic wafers, but they had their own rituals. Hair tonics filled with mercury, beard oils laced with formaldehyde, and of course, the eternal male tradition of pretending they were above beauty culture while secretly panicking about hairlines and waistlines. The line between vanity and survival was razor thin, and often literally fatal. One infamous case involved Lucy, a 19-year-old dressmaker in Manchester who took daily arsenic wafers after a friend told her it made the eyes sparkle. For a while it worked. People noticed. She glowed. Then she started losing her hair. Her teeth loosened. Her hands shook. She died at 22. At her funeral, one mourner said, "She looked like a doll, so pale and perfect." No one questioned why. So yes, they died for beauty. They withered politely. They smiled through the sickness. And society applauded, because better a pretty corpse than a plain survivor. Right. Let that sink in. Today we've swapped the arsenic for retinol, the turpentine for tongue scrapers. But the promise remains the same. That transformation lives in a bottle. That pain is a small price for beauty. That the mirror knows what matters, but you know better. Or, at least you're starting to. So tonight, when you look at your reflection, under the glow of a bathroom light that flatters no one, remember Lucy. Remember the wafers. Remember the garden of ghosts that bloomed in the name of a glow. And maybe, just maybe, skip the overnight detox tea. Fashion has always been about sacrifice. But sometimes, that sacrifice was your organs. Let's begin with the corset. The skeletal exoskeleton of the 18th and 19th centuries. At first glance it's a garment, a structured bodice, lace, whalebone, silk, lovely really, until you realize it was designed to reshape your torso like a particularly judgmental boa constrictor. Corsets weren't just snug, they were industrial. Some were pulled so tight that the ribs shifted. Internal organs moved, women fainted, constantly. Not because they were delicate flowers, but because their lungs were being held hostage by their own underwear. That's why fainting couches existed. They weren't decor, they were crash pads for women whose corsets were so tight they couldn't finish a sentence without blacking out. And yet, it was worth it. Because the hourglass figure was the mark of femininity, discipline, and upper-class refinement. If you could afford to have your body gradually squashed into an unnatural shape, congratulations, you were a lady. Now, just to be clear, corsets didn't always kill, but they certainly maimed. Autopsies from the era showed warped rib cages, compressed livers, and stomachs folded like tragic origami. One doctor described a patient's organs as being relocated entirely to the wrong districts, which is an elegant way of saying her spleen went on an unsupervised field trip. But corsets were only one chapter in the long novel of fashion-induced suffering. Let's pivot to foot binding in Imperial China. This wasn't a trend. It was a generational trauma. Young girls, often as young as 5, had their toes broken, curled under, and bound tightly with cloth. The goal? To create a 3-inch foot known as a lotus. It symbolized beauty, obedience, and marriageability. The reality? Infection, bone disintegration, lifelong disability. The process took years. The bindings were tightened daily. Girls screamed. Mothers wept, but they did it anyway, because an unbound foot meant social rejection. It meant poverty. It meant no husband, no status, no survival. And so they crushed bones for a future they'd never walk confidently into. Let that settle for a moment. Breathe that in. The silence of thousands of women limping through life for the privilege of being chosen. Then there were the neck rings of the Kayan women in Burma, starting in childhood. Brass coils were placed around the neck, and more were added as the girl aged. Contrary to myth, the rings didn't actually stretch the neck, they pressed the collarbone and ribs downward, creating the illusion of elongation. It wasn't painless. It wasn't comfortable. It was heavy, literally and metaphorically. But it was cultural, beautiful, a badge of identity, a lifelong statement. And once the rings were in place, they stayed. Removing them could cause pain, disorientation, and social exile. So was it oppression? Expression? Both? Neither? That's the uncomfortable truth of beauty rituals. They don't fit neatly into barbaric or empowering. They exist in the in-between, just like high heels. Originally invented for Persian cavalrymen, yes men, they allowed soldiers to lock their feet into stirrups while shooting arrows. Practical, but by the 17th century Europeans had adopted heels as status symbols. And eventually, women were the ones left wobbling. Victorian heels were narrow, unstable, and meant for display, not walking. Women took dainty, mincing steps, not because it was cute, but because their footwear was functionally a death trap. A twisted ankle was practically a love letter. Now let's take a horrifying detour into Mercury. In the 18th and 19th centuries, men's fashion included top hats lined with mercury nitrate to help felt the fabric. Unfortunately, prolonged exposure caused tremors, hallucinations, memory loss, and eventual insanity. Hence the phrase, mad as a hatter. Yes, that's not just a Lewis Carroll quip. It was a diagnosis. Milliners, often underpaid and overexposed to chemicals, inhaled mercury for years while crafting the very hats that symbolized wealth and elegance. The fashion elite wore poison on their heads and called it polish. Now, just when you think it can't get darker, let's talk about crinolines. Massive hoop skirts worn by Victorian women. They looked regal, floaty, like you were gliding through the drawing room on a cloud of tulle. But they were also fire hazards, made of steel and flammable fabrics. These skirts could easily catch flame from fireplaces, candles, or oil lamps. Once lit, they acted like a bellows, trapping heat and feeding oxygen to the fire. Dozens of women died each year from crinoline fires. One minute you're adjusting your lace, the next you're a human torch. And still, they wore them, because the silhouette was everything. Because beauty demanded it. Because not wearing the latest fashion could mean ridicule, judgment, or worse, invisibility. So here's the real question. How much would you suffer to fit in? Because beauty has never been just about looking nice. It's been about control, about belonging, about playing the role you were assigned. Even if that role came with blisters, bruises, or third-degree burns. For centuries people endured excruciating rituals. Not because they were foolish, but because the cost of non-conformity was higher. Physical pain was more manageable than social rejection, and being seen as unfeminine, unfit, unworthy. That's the tragedy. Not the corset itself, or the foot binding, or the hat, lined with madness, but the belief that these things were necessary, and we still see echoes of it today. High heels that wreck posture, shapewear that compresses organs, trends that demand suffering with a smile. So maybe fashion hasn't changed as much as we'd like to think. We just gave it better lighting. Sleep is supposed to be peaceful, restorative, gentle even. But if you lived in the 18th or 19th century and were determined to wake up looking radiant, your bedtime routine looked less like self-care and more like preparing for a particularly theatrical burial. Let's start with the concept of the corpse mask. And no, that's not a metaphor. That's a literal slab of raw meat, slapped onto the face and left overnight, pump the skin. Pork, beef, veal, pick your protein. The idea was that the natural juices would seep into the skin, hydrating it. What it actually did was rot slowly on your cheeks while you dreamed of social relevance. If you were wealthy, you could afford veal. If you were poor, you settled for beef trimmings. Either way, you woke up smelling like an abandoned butcher shop and looking like someone had slapped you with a cold apology. But meat masks were just the beginning. Let's take a dreamy little stroll into the world of belladonna eye drops, a nighttime favorite among women who wanted to keep their pupils dilated even in sleep. Belladonna, meaning beautiful woman, is derived from the deadly nightshade plant. 1 drop made your eyes wide and shiny, 2 drops made them glossy and haunting, 3 drops, potential blindness, but beauty demanded commitment. If a man stared into your enormous watery pupils and couldn't quite tell if you were alive or about to faint from organ failure, success. Belladonna wasn't only about aesthetics though, it was about mystique. You looked perpetually surprised, perpetually interested, like someone who had just been told a delightful secret, even if that secret was, your vision is permanently damaged. And then there were sleeping masks. Not the silky kind you find at spas today. These were concoctions of pig fat, crushed herbs, and chalk. You'd smear them on thick, forming a paste that dried like plaster. It was heavy, it cracked, it smelled like a haunted bar. One popular recipe involved goose grease and egg whites. Another used lead powder and lavender. Yet another required fermenting bread soaked in milk and wine, applied to the face like a soggy blessing. There was elegance. In theory. In practice. Moldy sourdough taped to your face. Some women went a step further. One 18th century duchess famously stored her night cream in a human skull, a gift from a deceased lover, or maybe just a particularly bad therapist. The skull sat on her vanity, filled with a custom blend of oils and powdered pearls. She believed it kept her youthful. It definitely kept her weird, but let's not pretend the body stopped at the face. Women also bound their hands at night to prevent fidgeting that might smudge the makeup. Some wore gloves filled with wax and rosewater, sealing in moisture like a florally scented curse. Others wrapped their heads in muslin to maintain the shape of their powdered wigs, sleeping stiffly like bejeweled mummies on borrowed time. And speaking of hair, if your wig was removed before bed, a luxury not all could afford, your scalp still needed attention. A nightly scalp massage with almond oil was ideal. If that wasn't available, sheep tallow would do, because nothing says elegance like going to bed greased like a roast. Let's not forget the neck. To prevent wrinkling, women would sleep with their heads elevated, sometimes by stiff pillows, sometimes with boards, to ensure the neck stayed elongated and uncreased. The resulting posture was less cozy slumber, a more Victorian vampire waiting for dawn. Some even wore collars to bed, soft linen versions of their day corsets, to train the neck into perfect posture while they slept, because apparently your spinal alignment needed to be bullied at all hours. And if you're thinking surely this wasn't comfortable, you'd be right. But comfort wasn't the point. Control were. Sleep wasn't a refuge from beauty standards. It was part of the campaign, a time to work quietly, chemically, obsessively, toward perfection. Even the air was curated. Victorian women often slept with scented sachets under their pillows, lavender, chamomile, dried rose petals, not for relaxation but to purify the skin through aromatic influence. One manual claimed that inhaling jasmine all night would encourage the blood to glow. Whatever that means, it all sounds absurd, ridiculous, hilarious even, until you remember the stakes. For many women, beauty wasn't optional. It was insurance. Insurance against abandonment, against poverty, against ridicule. If you weren't born beautiful, you had to manufacture it, even while unconscious. And so, the bedroom became a laboratory, a performance space, a battlefield. The irony, of course, is that these rituals often did more harm than good. Belladonna ruined eyesight. Lid masks poisoned the blood. Meat masks caused infections. But if you woke up with even the illusion of radiance, the pain was dismissed. After all, no one saw the effort, just the result. And if the result was slightly terrifying in the daylight, well, that was just part of the charm. So tonight, as you wash your face with overpriced serums and scroll sleepily through your feed, consider your historical sisters. Imagine lying in a four-poster bed with a pig-fat mask, lavender-scented gloves, a corset collar, and belladonna tears crusting in your eyes. Also, your husband wouldn't trade you in for a younger model with better ankles. And then, appreciate your cotton pillowcase. You've earned it, so you've smeared lead on your cheeks, scrubbed your gums with vinegar, slept with beef glued to your face, And still, tragically, you're ugly. What's a girl to do? Simple. You call in the supernatural, because before there were influencers, there were witches, and before there were serums and shade rangers, there were potions, prayers, and powdered frogs stored discreetly under your pillow. When beauty couldn't be bought, it had to be summoned. Let's start in medieval Europe, where women turned to folk magic to fix the face that God, genetics, or puberty had apparently botched. Beauty spells were common, whispered from mother to daughter, scrawled on scraps of parchment, or inscribed on bread. Yes, bread, then eaten under the light of a waxing moon. Imagine manifesting your glow-up by chewing stale sourdough at midnight. Delicious, empowering, mildly yeasty. One such charm instructed the practitioner to wash her face in dew collected from rose petals before sunrise, but only on Fridays, and only if Venus was in the right mood. Another suggested whispering your desired features into a mirror while combing your hair with a comb made from animal bone, preferably a goat. Not for aesthetic reasons, just goat energy apparently. Then there were love potions, because what's the point of being beautiful if no one wants to chase you through a candlelit meadow? The ingredients varied wildly. Some called for dried rosebuds and clove oil. Others went straight for the unhinged, menstrual blood stirred into wine, or a piece of fingernail buried under your crush's doorstep. One 16th century guide recommended collecting your own tears, mixing them with honey, and dabbing them behind your ears. If he still didn't notice you, add hair from his comb, and recite a Latin prayer about desire and destiny. Honestly, this could have been an early Pinterest board. But it wasn't just about attraction. Magic was also used to maintain beauty, or prevent it from being stolen. In many cultures, a beautiful woman was considered vulnerable to the evil eye, to jealous spirits, to, nabe. So women wore charms, talismans, braided herbs into their hair to ward off curses. In some Slavic traditions, young girls weren't allowed to look in mirrors at night, lest a spirit steal their reflection, and with it, their beauty. So next time you check your under-eye circles at 2 remember, you're also tempting fate. In ancient Rome, there was a spell involving a snake's skin, anise seeds, and moonlight chanting, all to ensure youthful skin. In the Middle East, women rubbed their faces with fig milk while reciting verses from poetry or scripture. In parts of West Africa, certain beauty rites included drawing sigils on the skin, using ochre and ash, calling upon ancestral energy for strength, a law, or protection. These weren't silly superstitions, they were strategies. In a world without dermatologists or legal rights, ritual became armor, magic was agency, and sometimes it worked. Or, rather, it gave women a sense of control, a system, a plan, even if that plan involved chanting over snails. Ah yes, snails. Ancient Greek women believed that the mucus of snails had rejuvenating properties, so they let them crawl across their cheeks, slowly sliming their way toward anti-aging salvation. And in a twist of history being both ridiculous and correct, modern science actually backs this up. Snail mucin is now a $500 million industry. So who's laughing now? Probably the snails. That things got darker too. During the witch-hunting centuries of early modern Europe, many beauty practices were labeled as sorcery. A woman who brewed herbal tonics for clear skin. A witch, a woman who wore herbs around her neck to prevent hair loss. Witch, a woman who didn't smell like spoiled pork fat and despair, definitely a witch. One famous case in 1621 involved a woman accused of enchanting a nobleman into finding her more radiant than God intended. Her crime? She wore blush made from crushed beetles and prayed for his affection. The verdict? Execution. Because clearly lipstick and longing were unnatural. It wasn't about the magic, it was about control. Society wanted to dictate how beauty worked, who deserved it, who owned it, and who should be punished for wielding it too confidently. Even in communities where beauty rituals were celebrated, there were rules. In some parts of medieval India, women performed moon-lipped Mehndi ceremonies, dyeing their hands and feet with henna. The patterns weren't just pretty, they told stories, invoked blessings. But if a woman's design was too bold, too suggestive, too dark, it was seen as a sign of vanity, or worse, seduction. You had to be beautiful, but not too beautiful, magical, but not threatening, glowing, but humble. Sound familiar? So yes, they turned to magic. Not just because they believed in spirits or spells, but because society offered no better alternative. No therapists, no skincare aisles. Just herbs, hope and whatever you could dig out of the garden under a full moon, but maybe, in a strange way, that made it sacred. Slathering honey on your lips, chanting over rosemary, praying to Venus with a crushed mirror and a handful of wildflowers. It was personal, messy, human, and in the end, wasn't that always the point? Not to become perfect, but to become powerful. So tonight, as you scroll through beauty hacks and filter tutorials, imagine a girl in 1403, crouched in the dark, tracing her dreams into a circle of ash. She doesn't want to be flawless. She wants to be seen. And that's the real spell. We like to think we've evolved, but our ancestors were naive, dramatic, and covered in questionable substances, while we, wise, enlightened, moisturized, are so much better. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because if you peel back the glowing Instagram filters and overpriced jade rollers, you'll find something uncomfortable underneath. We haven't changed that much. In fact, many of today's beauty trends are just ancient rituals in sexier packaging, with slightly fewer side effects and better lighting. Let's start with the modern holy grail of youth. Botox, a purified neurotoxin injected into your face to temporarily paralyze muscles, so you can look smooth, ageless and slightly surprised forever. Sounds futuristic, right? Except it's the same logic Renaissance elites used when they painted their faces with lead. If it stings, it must be working. Sure, Botox probably won't make your teeth fall out, but the impulse is the same. Freeze time. Stop the aging. Delay the inevitable. With needles. And speaking of needles, allow me to introduce the vampire facial. Popularized by celebrities with access to private dermatologists and an unusually high tolerance for gore, this trend involves drawing your own blood, spinning it in a machine, and then injecting the plasma back into your face. The results? Glowy, fresh, slightly terrifying. And while it might sound like a rejected Anne Rice plot, the idea of using blood as a rejuvenating elixir is ancient. Roman gladiators drank the blood of slain enemies for strength. Medieval apothecaries sold powdered mummies as a cure for age and disease. Is it cannibalism? Is it skincare? Is it both? Let's not dwell on that too long. Then there's the snail slime. Yes, it's back. Once a quirky beauty secret from ancient Greece, snail mucin has slithered into the 21st century as a coveted ingredient in high-end serums, advertised as a miracle hydrator. It's applied lovingly by influencers who, 500 years ago, would have been standing in a marble courtyard, whispering prayers, while letting an actual snail drag itself across their cheek. Progress. But the parallels don't stop at ingredients. They live in the language too. Take a walk down the skincare aisle. Detox, purify, clarify. It's the same terminology found in medieval manuscripts about bloodletting and spiritual cleansing, except now it's printed in cursive on a bottle that cost $49.95 and smells like cucumber anxiety. And those celebrity endorsements? They're just the modern equivalent of royal decree. Back then, if Queen Elizabeth I wore white lead, so did everyone else. Sores be damned. Today, if a pop star launches a collagen line and posts about it from a private jet, millions buy it. The substance changes. The psychology doesn't. Even the rituals remain eerily familiar. Consider the 10-step Korean skincare routine. A soothing, deeply personal process that requires time, intention, and a small fortune in ampoules. Now compare that to the morning routine of a Roman noblewoman. Oil cleansing, exfoliation with flour, face masks made from honey and herbs, and a final rinse with rose water. One has retinol, the other had donkey milk. Same energy. Then there's the omnipresent filter, that subtle blur of skin texture, the digitally enhanced cheekbone, the brightness adjustment that says, I woke up like this, while quietly erasing every trace of reality. It's magic, but not the fun, spellbook kind. It's the sanitized, algorithmic, passive-aggressive cousin of folk ritual. Instead of whispering to mirrors under the moon, we now beg our front-facing camera to spare us the truth, and we judge accordingly. We judge the pause, the laugh lines, the unedited selfies posted, as a statement that somehow still looks suspiciously good. We compare, obsess, and purchase. We exfoliate in the morning and digitally smooth ourselves by night. Then we pretend not to care, 'Cause real beauty is on the inside, right? Tell that to the $600 billion global beauty industry. Now before this turns into a full existential spiral, let's acknowledge something important. Not all modern beauty is bad. We have better science, safer products. Most of the time we know when something is toxic. Usually, but we also carry the same fears: aging, invisibility, imperfection. The same ones that led a Victorian woman to swallow arsenic, and now whispering to a teenager through a sponsored post about lip filler. Different platform. Same pressure. So what do we do with that? Do we delete the apps? Smash the mirrors? Flee into the woods and smear berries on our cheeks like medieval influencers in exile? No. We remember that the beauty rituals of history weren't silly. They were survival. They were hope. They were community. And today's rituals, however commodified, still reflect that very human desire to be seen, and to be seen as in that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to glow. There's nothing wrong with enjoying a serum, a contour palette, or a 7-step routine that makes you feel like a functioning human being. But maybe, just maybe, we can glow with awareness, with humor, with a little less desperation, and a little more compassion. So next time you roll on your eye cream or swipe on that carmine-tinted gloss, think of the women who came before you, the ones who powdered with lead, painted with poison, and prayed for a love spell to kick in before dinner, and then look in the mirror. Really look. Because you're not just a face. You're a continuation of a story that's been told in ashes and honey, in whispers and snail trails. And whether you post it or not, that's something worth seeing. Let's drop the sarcasm for just a moment. Not completely, don't worry, but just enough to let something else in. Grief. Because for all the powdered wigs, beetle lipstick, and Victorian face bacon, there's a quiet truth that runs underneath every absurd ritual we've explored so far. It hurt. Not metaphorically. Not artistically. Literally. Bleeding gums, blistered skin, poisoned bloodstreams. Every beauty ideal came with a bill. And more often than not, women, especially women, paid it in private, with interest. Take Isabelle de Lac, a 17th century French noblewoman known for her porcelain beauty. She was envied, praised in salon, painted twice by a royal court artist who insisted she had the skin of moonlight and the lips of crushed coral. What they didn't paint: the open sores beneath her lead foundation, the constant nausea from mercury eyeliner, the headaches, the vomiting, the fatigue. She died at 32. Her death was ruled natural, because at the time, no one wanted to admit that chasing flawlessness could be fatal. Her maid reportedly whispered, "Madame died beautiful," a eulogy and a warning, all in one. And that wasn't rare. It was routine, because the standards weren't just high, they were cruel, unreachable, arbitrary. And the irony, the people setting them weren't the ones suffering from them. Royal courts decided that high foreheads were desirable, so women burned their hairlines. Men declared pale skin virtuous, so women smeared on arsenic. Every ritual, every product, every night spent sleeping in pig fat or rosewater gloves was a way of asking, do I matter now? And if that sounds familiar, because despite our modern lighting, science and packaging, we still live with those questions, still sell answers disguised as creams, still frame perfection as a responsibility, especially for women. In 18th century Japan, the geisha world carried its own quiet brutality. Beneath the grace and artistry were routines so strict they bordered on monastic. Young Maiko, apprentice geishas, trained endlessly in dance, etiquette, conversation, and appearance. Their beauty was not spontaneous. It was engineered. They wore layers of white makeup, blackened their teeth, painted on perfect crimson lips in a style that made speaking difficult. The obi, the wide sash tied at the back, was wrapped so tightly it left bruises, and it had to be rewrapped daily by assistants trained to make the knot sit just right, like a visual poem stitched with pressure. At night, many Maiko slept on wooden neck blocks to preserve their elaborate hairstyles. If they rolled off, they were punished. Sometimes physically, sometimes with humiliation, sometimes with silence. The worst kind of disapproval in a world where reputation was currency. Some bled, some fainted, all smiled, and still, they were admired. Poets wrote odes to their elegance. Foreigners called them living art. No one asked what it felt like to go to bed, knowing your beauty had to be earned again the next morning, through pain, precision, and erasure, because that's the real price, isn't it? Not just the products, not just the effort, but the idea that your worth is conditional, that every smile, every compliment, every opportunity is a reward for compliance, for enduring, for shrinking into the mold. And yet, they kept doing it, not because they were brainwashed or vain, but because in many cases, there was no other option. Marriage wasn't a partnership, it was survival. Beauty wasn't indulgence, it was strategy. A well-executed face could mean security, protection, the difference between being treated with a shred of dignity, or being dismissed, discarded, or worse. So they powdered. They peeled. They bled, not out of weakness, but out of will, and that in its own tragic way is power, not the kind that liberates, but the kind that endures, the kind that says, "You may control my choices, but you will not break me." The quiet resistance of a woman choosing how to suffer, because no one ever offered her the choice not to. It's tempting to look back and roll our eyes, to mock the rituals, the ingredients, the absurdity of putting your faith in crushed pearl or goat bile, but that's easy, lazy, harder is recognizing ourselves in their stories. Harder is admitting that we still spend our days contouring our insecurities, editing our reflections, and hoping that maybe, this time, will be enough. Different chemicals, same hunger, different mirrors, same prayers. And what does that leave us with? A question, one that women have been whispering through rue-stained lips for centuries. Who would I be if I didn't have to be beautiful? It's a question we don't ask often enough, or answer honestly, because the truth is messy, liberating, and a little terrifying. So yes, let's remember Isabel, the geishas, the maids, the duchesses, not as victims, not as fools, but as people who navigated a brutal system with grace, grit, and a lot of goat grease. And maybe, just maybe, let's start paying attention to the price tags we don't see, the ones we're still charging to ourselves, every day, in pursuit of someone else's definition of perfect, because beauty, real beauty, shouldn't have a body count. Before there were beauty influencers, there were imperial apothecaries. Before marketing campaigns, there were monks peddling miracle powders, and snake oil barons promising eternal youth in a bottle. And before billion-dollar cosmetic brands plastered glossy ads on subways and screens, people were already being sold a dream, the same dream just with fewer vowels and way more lead. Let's get one thing straight. The beauty industry didn't invent insecurity, it just weaponized it. Picture it. Ancient Rome, a bustling market lined with stalls hawking every conceivable powder, perfume and paste. Merchants screamed about the exotic origins of their wares. Egyptian kohl for bold eyes, frankincense-infused oils to capture the gods' attention, and blush made from wine-soaked sheep fat. Yes, really. And who were the buyers? Everyone. Rich matrons, curious husbands, status-hungry senators. Beauty wasn't personal, it was political. The paler your skin, the less labor you did, the more scent you wore, the more elite you seemed, the more expensive your mirror, the more seriously people took your opinions. In short, vanity paid dividends. And when there's a profit to be made, there's always someone happy to sell you the cure. Usually to a problem they made up. Fast forward a few centuries and then to the Renaissance beauty trade, where entire economies sprang up around looking pale, demure, and slightly coarse-like. Italy, France, and England became booming centers of cosmetic innovation, or depending how you look at it, biohazard experimentation labs in powdered form. Phoenician ceruse, a delightful blend of lead and vinegar, was sold in delicately carved boxes for premium prices. French beauty patches, literal velvet stickers shaped like stars and moons, covered up scars left by smallpox or mercury cream. In Elizabethan England, merchants were shipping in crushed mother of pearl by the barrel. And the messaging? Consistent. You're not enough yet. But you could be. If you just tried this one thing. Sound familiar? Because now we've entered the modern era. And by modern, I mean the 19th century, where advertising started to look suspiciously like gaslighting, with a logo. The Victorians mastered it. Beauty manuals were printed en masse, promising women that, with the right regimen of arsenic wafers, ammonia hair rinses, and modesty, they could be truly loved, soap companies launched full-page newspaper ads with headlines like, "Are you offensive? Try Pear's soap." Offensive? To whom? God? Society? Your own reflection? Didn't matter. The goal was to sell you the fear. The solution was extra. By the 1920s, Hollywood had entered the chat, and suddenly, millions of women were comparing their faces to Greta Garbo's cheekbones and Clara Bow's Cupid's bow lips. Cosmetic companies exploded. Helena Rubinstein, Elizabeth Arden, Max Fact. Brands weren't just selling makeup, they were selling identity. "You too can look like her," they whispered. "If you spend, suffer, and obey." And we listened. We still do. Today the global beauty industry is worth over $600 billion. That's billion. With a B, more than the GDP of most countries. It's an empire, built not on foundations of skin health, but on the subtle erosion of self-worth, one wrinkle cream at a time. Ever notice how every ad is both a compliment and an insult? You're gorgeous. But imagine if you had this serum. You deserve to glow. Here's a little something to fix what we won't name. It's genius. Sociopathic, maybe. But genius. Even social media, the wild west of beauty culture, has found a way to profit from insecurity at scale. Every filter, every no makeup look, every 3 a.m. skincare haul is part of a machine that runs on one basic fuel. You're almost there. But here's the kicker. The goalpost never stops moving. Back then, it was white skin. Then it was tan, thin lips, then full lips, bushy brows, then pencil brows, then laminated caterpillars on your face. And every time the standard shifts, guess what? You need new products, new tools, new techniques. It's like a treadmill made of glitter and shit. And yes, men are in the game too now. Slowly, subtly, but profitably. Beard oil, tinted moisturizers, anti-aging serums with names like Brutox and War Cream, because masculinity is fragile, but apparently still moisturizable. It's not just about capitalism, it's about control. Because the more time we spend worrying about our pores, our jawlines, our leg hair angles, the less time we spend challenging the systems that convinced us we were flawed in the first place. So, what's more disgusting? The beauty rituals, or the reasons behind them? Because when you look closely, the rituals were never really about beauty at all. They were about signaling, about surviving, about belonging, about winning a game where the rules were made by people who never had to play it. And when you pull that thread, it gets personal. How many hours have you spent plucking, shaving, curling, exfoliating, toning, contouring, or regretting? How many dollars? How much pain? How much mental space? And for what? A nod from a stranger. A like on a post. A fleeting sense of control in a world that rewards impossible standards. Yeah. Let that sink in. Here's the truth they don't advertise. You were never the problem. Your face, your body, your scars, your hair, your age, your weird tooth. None of that was a flaw until someone with a product told you it was. So go ahead, wear the makeup. Buy the cream. Love the ritual. There's power in choosing how you present yourself. Just remember, empires only stand if we keep buying the lie. When we think of historical beauty rituals, the first images that spring to mind are usually powdered wigs, painted cheeks, and women fainting into corsets. But hold your horses or your wigs, because men were far from innocent in this glamorous chaos. In fact, if history were a party, men showed up early, decked out in more makeup than half the room, ready to outshine, outscent, and outstrut their female counterpart. Take 17th century France, for example, where the court of Louis XIV was less a royal gathering, and more a glittering masquerade of masculinity. Men wore elaborate wigs powdered white, as if to suggest they'd just emerged from a fresh snowfall, which was tricky considering the real snow was often on their heads in the form lice and dandruff. These wigs weren't just fashion statements, they were status symbols. The bigger, the more powdered, the more expensive, and the heavier. Some weighed upwards of 10 pounds, requiring a network of pins, pants, and occasional help from a court barber known as a perruquier. The phrase heavy-headed probably originated here, alongside the epidemic of neck strain and headaches, and the wigs were just the beginning. Men painted their faces too, rouge on the cheeks, white lead powder on the skin. The same toxic concoctions women used to achieve that ghostly pallor. Lips were tinted red, eyebrows penciled in, and eyelashes darkened with soot. Why? Because paleness wasn't just feminine, it was aristocratic. A man who worked outdoors? Peasant. A man who carried a sword and polished his face? Royalty. In fact, men's beauty standards were often even more rigid than women's. A single visible blemish could mean ruin for your social standing, especially in courts where image was everything. You couldn't just rely on charm or wit. Your face was a billboard for power. Fast forward to ancient Korea, where male warriors, yes, warriors, were just as invested in appearance as the court ladies. They applied kohl eyeliner to their eyes, not just for aesthetics but to reduce glare from the sun and intimidate enemies. But it also gave them an air of mystery and danger. The ancient equivalent of the smouldering gaze perfected by every James Bond actor ever. And let's not forget the Roman senators. While we usually think of Roman men as stern togas-wearing stoics, many actually took grooming seriously. They used perfumes extracted from flowers and herbs, shaved carefully, and maintained hairstyles that involved more upkeep than a modern Instagram influencer's morning routine. Even the Victorians had their share of male beauty obsession. Gentlemen's grooming kits were stocked with razors, brushes, scented powders, and hair tonics infused with mercury. Yes, the same poison that did wonders for skin pallor also made a cameo in men's grooming rituals. If mercury didn't kill you, the tight collars and heavy cravats just might. Victorian fashion for men wasn't about comfort, it was about projecting an image of control and refinement, often at the expense of actual breathing room. And speaking of control, male beauty practices were deeply entwined with masculinity. To adorn oneself was not to be vain, but to assert status. The more time and resources spent on grooming, the clearer the signal. I am powerful. I am elite. I am above manual labor. This is where it gets interesting. For centuries, men's grooming was less scrutinized socially than women's. Not because it was less intense, but because society assumed men's vanity was natural and unthreatening. A man who wore makeup was sophisticated. A woman who did the same risked being labeled frivolous or worse. This double standard laid the groundwork for centuries of gendered beauty politics. And yet, men's beauty culture was never static. In the 1920s, the so-called flapper era introduced the metrosexual man who paid attention to skincare, hair, and even makeup. In the modern day, men's grooming exploded into a multi-billion-dollar industry. Beard oils, concealers, tinted moisturizers, and yes, Botox for bros, cheekily dubbed Brotox. So what drives this madness? Vanity, survival, social signaling? Probably all of the above. Because beauty, in every era, is about power. Who has it? Who wants it, and who gets to define it? Men's participation in beauty culture isn't new. It's part of a long story about identity, control, and the human desire to be seen as worthy. And if history teaches us anything, it's this. Underneath the powder and perfume, the scars and paint, men and women alike have always been wrestling with the same question. Am I enough? So here we are, at the end of our parade of powders, poisons, potions and powdered wigs. You survived a historical gauntlet of beauty rituals so odd, so agonizing and so inventively disgusting. It's a wonder anyone in history had the energy left to do anything but nap, and maybe that's the best place to pause. The idea of sleep, of rest, of finally putting it all down. Let's exhale together. Take a moment, really let it sink in. All that ambition, all those hopes, all the mashed snails and burnt almonds. Centuries of longing, chasing, sacrificing comfort for something as fleeting as a compliment. And in the end, all anyone wanted was a moment of quiet recognition. To be seen, to be chosen, to be... It's almost poetic, isn't it? That after a day, or in this case an entire life, of scraping, plucking, waxing, staining, powdering, burning and wrapping, there's always the soft, dark mercy of sleep. The one ritual that, for a few hours at least, asks nothing of us. No posture to correct, no blemish to conceal, no smile to maintain. And yet, even sleep wasn't always left untouched by beauty's demands. We've already met the Duchess with her pig-fat mask and the geisha teetering on a neck block. For centuries, sleep wasn't merely for rest. It was an extension of the performance, an opportunity to marinate in animal fat, to breathe in lavender-scented prayers, to sculpt the neck with linen collars, or chase away the evil eye with herbs and incantations. Imagine trying to dream with one ear alert for your night cream dripping onto the floor. It's exhausting, isn't it? The pressure to be lovely, even unconscious. To fight the honest softness of age, the gentle entropy of existence. But here's the truth you can feel. Even as the sarcasm settles, nobody wins this game forever. Even Cleopatra woke up with bedhead. Even Louis XIV's face paint flaked by noon. The rituals fade. The pigments run. The stories remain. So maybe, as you lie down tonight, it's worth reflecting, gently, kindly, on what all these rituals actually gave us. Yes, there was pain. Yes, there was nonsense. But there was also invention, creativity, laughter, and sometimes solidarity. There's a peculiar intimacy in knowing that, across thousands of years, millions of people have struggled with the same fears and the same ridiculous hopeful solutions. It's proof we've always been connected, not just through suffering, but through ingenuity, through the need to connect, to be part of a tribe, even if that tribe's entry fee was a face full of leeches or a mouth washed in Portuguese urine. Let that comfort you a bit, if you can. Because beauty, real beauty, has always been about more than perfection. It's been about connection. The stories we pass down, the rituals we share, the small, funny, almost rebellious ways we insist on mentoring, and maybe that's the most restful thought of all. You don't have to do anything extra to belong. You don't have to sleep in goose fat or recite spells under the full moon, or contour your face with the crushed hopes of beetles. You just have to show up day after day and dare to be seen. Sometimes barefaced, sometimes imperfect, always real. So tonight, let yourself off the hook. Brush your teeth with toothpaste, please. Moisturize if you want, or don't. Pull the covers up, sink it. Remember that you are already the result of thousands of years of stubborn, messy, ingenious, deeply human people who decided, in their own weird ways, to keep trying. Tomorrow, the world will still be there, with its powders, its judgments, its hashtags, and hot takes. But tonight, you let go of the chase, you close your eyes, you remember that sometimes the bravest beauty ritual is to do nothing at all. And in that stillness, in the honest quiet after a history's worth of noise, maybe, just maybe, you'll find something even rarer than flawless. Peace, sleep well, time traveler. You'd think by this point in history someone would have stood up, peeled the beef off their face and said, enough, no more powders, no more leeches, no more animal-based exfoliants. But if humanity has a superpower, it's the ability to look suffering in the eye and say, what if we just bled a little more? Welcome to the spectacularly macabre world of beauty by bloodletting and fire, where the pursuit of radiance meant unleashing your inner hemoglobin, or quite literally setting your face on fire. Let's start with bloodletting, that ancient, almost universal medical pastime. While most of us think of bloodletting as a treatment for fever or bad moods, it was also considered a reliable ticket to glowing skin. The logic went something like this. Too much blood, or bad blood, made your complexion dull. Want to look vibrant, lose a pint or two. So, off you'd go to your local barber surgeon, the medieval version of a spa technician, only with worse hygiene and more axes on the wall. For a fee, and possibly a shot of something fermented, he'd open a vein behind your ear, or at your temple, drain just enough to make you feel faint but not dead, and pat you on the back for your new, ghostly pallor. The elite didn't just settle for a casual bloodletting either. There were routines, monthly, before big events, before portraits, or even as part of a bridal preparation. There's even record of one 16th century French noblewoman, the radiant Lady de Vienne, who insisted on having her cheeks refreshed with a few leeches before every ball. A secret weapon. A bowl of chilled leeches waiting under her vanity table, ready for action. Nothing says ready to mingle like a couple of slimy freeloaders dangling from your jaw. Of course, bloodletting wasn't reserved for the rich. Poorer folks made do with homemade lancets, wild leeches plucked from muddy streams, or, if they were particularly unlucky, an amateur family member eager to try out a new razor. The result was always the same. A flushed, fragile look that could be read as delicate, fashionable, or on the verge of collapse. Which honestly you probably were. But let's raise the stakes. If bloodletting wasn't dramatic enough, how about fire cupping? Practiced for centuries in parts of Asia and the Middle East, This ritual was part medicine, part cosmetic. A glass cup was heated with a flame, then pressed against the skin to create suction. The resulting bruises were considered signs of good health, and sometimes good looks. In some beauty circles, fire cupping was done on the face to draw out toxins and bring a rosy, plumped-up glow to the cheeks. Rosy. Sometimes swollen, spotty and mildly traumatized. Always. But hey, what's a little discomfort in the name of radiance? And there were those who went even further. Enter Clara of Württemberg, a 17th century noblewoman whose quest for beauty was matched only by her tolerance for pain, and apparently the smell of burning flesh. Court records describe Clara submitting to a branding ritual intended to burn out the evil humors that marred her complexion. She emerged with a face full of scars and briefly a surge of courtly admiration, though let's be honest, most of that was probably just shot. Clara's fate, not exactly a fairy tale ending, but her story burned into the gossip of the royal court, a cautionary tale whispered to daughters and servants alike. Beauty hurts, but maybe not this much. All this raises a question, one that hangs in the smoky air above every hot cup and open vein. Why did pain become so entwined with beauty? Was it the allure of control, the promise that you could shape your destiny, or at least your face with enough sacrifice? Was it about belonging, following a ritual that made you part of an elite club, or was it just another game of one-upmanship, a contest to see who could endure the most in pursuit of admiration? Maybe it was all of these things. Maybe, in a world full of uncertainty, pain was a currency you could spend, proof that you were committed, tough, willing to do whatever it took. Let that settle for a moment. Because even today, we see the echoes, the chemical peels, the microneedling, the willingness to spend a paycheck on a procedure that promises to rejuvenate through discomfort. Maybe we're not setting our faces on fire, but the torch has been passed. So next time you grimace at a blackhead extraction, or sigh at a particularly aggressive exfoliator, remember Clara. Remember the leeches in the fire cups and the medieval spa days that ended in bandages and bed rest. And then, just for a moment, be grateful for the humble, modern pimple patch. For the gentle serum. For the ability to say nope to leeches without social consequence. Because in the grand sweep of beauty history, we're the lucky ones. The ones who can choose comfort. The ones who can close our eyes at night, knowing our radiance isn't paid for in blood or flame. Sleep on that. This is the part where the lights fade, the powders settle, and the echo of ancient beauty rituals hushes to a whisper. You're left. Finally, mopped with a list of horrors or oddities, but with the most human question of all, why did we do all this to ourselves? It's easy to laugh at the past, at the dung masks and leech facials, the arsenic candies and snail trail serums. But laughter is a mask too. Sometimes it keeps us from seeing the raw need beneath the ridicule, the longing to be wanted, to belong, to feel, even for a moment, that we might be enough. Because for every disastrous trend, there was a quiet hope. Maybe this will work. Maybe this will change everything. Maybe tonight, I'll go to bed, beautiful, and wake up sick. That hope is older than any empire. It's older than the Egyptian coal, the Roman strigil, the French powder puff. It's older than mirrors, and it's never just about beauty. It's about power, survival, and the unspoken rules of a world that has always demanded women, and often enough, men, trade pieces of themselves for a fleeting sense of worth. Let's peel back the final mask. For the women who scraped, plucked, bled, and burned, beauty was sometimes the only currency they controlled. In a society where you might not own your body, your property, or even your voice, you could at least own your ritual, the preparation, the patience, the pay, even when it cost you dearly. It was a way to declare, I am here, I matter. Look at me, even if just for a moment. It was a secret language, a negotiation, a protest hidden beneath layers of rouge and rice powder. Some rituals were protective, others punitive, but all of them were attempts to take a little power back from a world determined to withhold it. Think of the geisha, sleeping upright, her head resting on a wooden pillow, to protect a hairstyle that would earn her both adoration and aching muscles. Think of Clara of Württemberg, bearing her scars in the ballroom, equal parts spectacle and warn. Think of every girl who ever pressed her face into a cold mirror, whispering a spell or a hope into her own reflection, willing herself to be enough. And yes, think of yourself, Maybe your ritual is a sheet mask and a cup of tea. Maybe it's curling your lashes or uncurling your hair. Maybe it's nothing at all but a glance in the mirror before you walk out the door. A silent prayer that you'll be seen with kindness. These acts are not so different from the ancient ones. Just safer, softer, better lit. They are the gentle inheritance of 1,000 years of striving, failing, laughing, and hoping. Let that sink in. Not the arsenic, not the pig fat, not the sorrow, just the simple, complicated truth that beauty rituals have always been about more than appearance. They are about control in a world that gives us too little, about connection when the world wants us isolated, about hope, stubborn and persistent, refusing to die no matter how many bad eyebrow trends history throws at us. And yes, about rebellion. Every woman who refused to follow the latest toxic trend, who wore her scars or her wrinkles or her joy without shame, was quietly rebellious. So is every person now who steps away from the should and toward their own idea of what feels right, safe or joyful. So, as the night deepens and you press your face into your pillow, know this: you are the sum of centuries of longing, the result of millions of whispered secrets, daring inventions, quiet revolutions. You carry the legacy of beetle shells and burnt almonds, of bruised necks and powdered wigs, of mistakes and miracles. And somehow, through all that chaos, you are still here, still glowing, still utterly, defiantly human. So tomorrow, when you face the world, bare or painted, indifferent or eager, remember the truth behind every mask. You are always enough. You always will be. Let that be the ritual you carry forward. Now, close your eyes. Rest easy. The history of beauty is heavy, but you don't have to carry it alone. You made it through the powders and poisons, through the pain and the preemie. You've earned your rest. No strange creams required. Sleep well, time traveler. Tomorrow, wake up to yourself. If this video didn't put you to sleep, at least it made you grateful for modern plumbing and non-lethal eyeliner. Subscribe for more slow dives into the strange, the disgusting and the eerily relatable past. And next time you're applying that night cream, just be glad it's not fermented bird droppings. See you in your weirdest dreams.